It looks like the idea of price controls and direct government intervention on the markets went straight back into the headlines of mainstream media after decades of being relegated to the history books. President Bukele of El Salvador starts enforcing price controls in supermarkets. Kamala Harris calls for price gouging ban to combat high grocery costs. President Maduro imposes new price controls in Venezuela, triggering fear of empty shelves once again. Price caps on food further extended in Hungary. Minister states goal is single-digit inflation by the end of the year. You know, when trying to solve the great issues of our time, it's often a good idea to have a look into the past and see if people have already tried your proposed solutions before. Today I'm telling you a story about how Rome tried setting up price controls to curb inflation and how it didn't turn out the way they wanted. Let me introduce you to Emperor Diocletian, who reigned between 285 and 305 AD. Diocletian is a controversial figure. On one hand, he is credited with putting an end to the great crisis of the 3rd century, a period of 50 years when the Roman Empire nearly collapsed from a combination of civil wars, separatist movements, and foreign invasions. He was a very accomplished general, right when the empire needed one. He reorganized the Roman military, breaking down the army into quick response units that could quickly deploy in areas where they were needed the most. He also stabilized the empire politically, separating the army from politics and dividing the empire in 4 more manageable territories to be ruled by 4 co-emperors in a system called the Tetrarchy. On the other hand, he was a ruthless figure. Diocletian needlessly persecuted religious minorities, particularly targeting the growing Christian populations. He was incredibly authoritarian, changing permanently how the empire would see the image of the emperor. Gone were the days of the princeps, the first citizen. From Diocletian onwards, the emperor was your dominus, literally meaning lord. He also didn't just want to reform the empire's military or its administration. He wanted to have a say on everything, restructuring the empire and eventually the way people lived their lives in the way he considered appropriate. To be fair with Diocletian, when he took power in 285, if there was one thing that needed to be reformed and restructured, it was the economy, or what was left of it, after 5 decades of complete chaos. 50 different emperors and usurpers met violent deaths during the crisis years. The economy grinded to a halt. The silver mines produced less and less silver with every passing year, and one of the very few things going through the head of all of these emperors was finding ways to come up with enough money to pay for as many soldiers as possible so they could keep being emperor. This led to a phenomenon called debasement, when you reduce the silver purity of each coin you make while maintaining the denomination value. This allowed you to make more coins with less silver and pay more soldiers. After all, that's all that mattered. A sound currency wasn't very important if you couldn't pay your bodyguards, and they just stabbed you to death because of that. By the first years of the crisis, Roman silver coins were just under 50% silver, like this denarius I'm showing you. These were slowly hoarded away, pushed out of circulation by the torrent of lower quality coins coming out of the mints. Don't even get me started on gold. Those were very rarely seen by the overall population, being traded as a commodity, rather than for its official value of 25 denarii per gold coin. The thing got so bad that when Diocletian took control, this is what the coins in circulation looked like. Basically a copper coin with a small amount of silver, roughly 5% mixed in, and a silver wash on its surface to improve its appearance. Coins from previous emperors such as Gallienus or Claudius II also circulated. These were even worse. This coin from Claudius I'm showing you only has 2% silver in it. But people were not stupid. Farmers, merchants, artisans, and especially soldiers. They needed to make a living, and they saw with each passing year the coins they were paid with had less and less silver in them. So they raised their prices, or in the case of soldiers, demanded raises, to compensate for the deteriorating coinage, leading to a runaway inflation. The solution Diocletian came up with was a complete renewal of the monetary system. It was based on a unit of account, a basic unit to determine the value of things, called the denarius communis, and a brand new set of coins. 2 copper coins worth 1 and 2 denarii communes, a big copper-silver mixed coin called the numus, worth initially 12.5 denarii, a nearly pure silver coin, something the Romans hadn't seen for over a century, worth 50 denarii, and the new gold coin, which initially was worth 1,200 denarii, but in reality was more of a commodity coin, used by the elites, the high-ranking officers in the military, and important merchants, with its value determined by the value of gold. It's very unlikely you would ever see one of these gold aureus in circulation. These were just for the elites. Just to illustrate what these coins look like, here's one of them, a numus, the copper-silver mix piece I just mentioned, struck in the name of Diocletian. Notice how it has a silvering layer on its surface to hide the coppery look of the coin and give it the appearance of being more valuable, as it only had 5% silver in it. This was supposed to be the workhorse of the new Roman monetary standard, the most common coin in circulation. The smaller denominations were basically pocket change, the silver argenteus was considered a storage of value, and gold, as I previously said, was only really accessible to the aristocracy. These, however, were struck by the hundreds of millions, maybe by the billions, and many have survived to our days. Diocletian also used this new system of pricing everything into this new unit of account in the single largest census operation in all of ancient history. He hired an army of public employees and tasked them with going to all corners of the empire, taking account of every man, woman, child, and any property they owed, how much land you had, how productive it was, how many animals you had, the value of your property, what you worked on. Everything was registered. A total value of your property in denarii communis was determined, and you owed the imperial coffers a part of that every year as tax, which you could pay in kind or with the new coins. If we ignore for a second Diocletian's insatiable hunger for increasing the empire's tax revenue, the idea of a complete restructuring of the monetary standard made perfect sense. Let's make a new system with new coins of standardized, well-controlled metal weight and metal composition. And let's go from there. A blank slate. The problem is, the economy of 3rd century Rome was everything but a blank slate. Diocletian failed to grasp the concept of money supply. In order to control inflation, Diocletian had to first withdraw all of the billions of low-quality coins in circulation. It seems like there was some effort to take the worst coins out of the markets and recycle them into the new ones, but by looking at evidence from treasures of the time, the older, low-quality coins just kept circulating and were probably given a value in the new denarius communis system based on how much silver they had in their weight. Here is where a fatal flaw in his plan lies. Money is a merchandise like everything else, and its value is determined by supply and demand. Diocletian didn't reduce the supply of bad money, and on top of it, he dumped a mountain of brand new coins into the market. The result? More coins, a larger supply of denarius communis in the overall economy for the same amount of goods. So inflation just continued soaring higher and higher. Remember I said Diocletian was an autocrat and really wanted to have control over everything? Yeah, when he saw his new system wasn't curbing inflation, he was pissed. And who did he blame for his failure? Well, Let me quote from one of his speeches. "With an unrestrainable passion for endless gain, the merchants and profiteers have driven up prices to such an extent that, although there is an abundance of the necessities of life, they are made scarce by the exceedingly high prices demanded. For who is so obtuse, so unconscious of the usual good, that he does not know or perceive the immoderate prices are caused more by a boundless of insane greed than by any real shortage of goods? Therefore, conscious of our responsibility to protect the common welfare of all men, and moved by that justice and piety which has always governed our empire, we have decided that there should be a maximum for the prices of goods sold to the common people, so that when their insatiable avarice has been brought to an end, the public good may be considered. And we decree that those who violate this law in any way, either by attempting to exact more than the maximum price or by the secret methods, shall be subject to the penalty of death." That's right, in 301 AD, Diocletian issued a gigantic edict of maximum prices, an enormous list of the maximum prices that could be charged for all kinds of goods, services, and salaries you could imagine. It is one of the most interesting Roman documents ever written, as it gives an account of the kinds of goods and services you could access in the Roman economy. Everything was cataloged and given a price, from a haircut at a barber, which would have cost you 2 denarii, so one of these small copper coins I'm showing you right now, to stuff like qualities of wine. For example, you could have half a liter of ordinary wine for 8 denarii, and the list just goes on and on. Everything had its prices dictated by law. The most expensive item on the list was a live lion at a whopping 150,000 denarii. The edict is so thorough that even lions have different price tags, with a lion of the first quality being valued at 150,000, but a second-class lion was more budget-friendly at 120,000 denarii. I wonder how they classify the lion as being second class. The edict made no considerations to seasonality, to the differences in purchasing power of each province, or the differences in production and shipping costs. Olive oil that was produced in Hispania and was very affordable there was the same price as in cold, wet Britannia. The price of grain in major population centers like Rome was the same as in Africa or Egypt, the bread baskets of the empire, where grain was plentiful and cheap to produce. The lack of knowledge on economics doesn't end here. To compensate for the loss of purchasing power caused by inflation between his monetary reform in 295 and the time of the Edict of Maximum Prices in 301, and to push people to use his new coins, he decreed a geminatia potentia, meaning a doubling of value of all of his new coins. So the numus, that was worth 12.5 denarii, was now worth 25. The argenteus went from 50 to 100, although it's most likely it circulated with a premium as it had more intrinsic value in relation to its denominational value if compared to the numus. And finally, the gold coin, the aureus, kept being a commodity coin, and its value could have been as high as 50,000 denarii. Perfect. All we needed was even more denarii in circulation, increasing the money supply even more. The result? More inflation. Despite the capital punishment being the penalty for disrespecting the Edict of Prices, scarcity soon hit the market, with most goods simply moving to the black market. No one was going to sell their goods for a loss, or for coins with an artificially inflated value. Contemporary sources mention the unnecessary bloodshed every time a merchant was caught trying to sell things for their real value. The edict didn't last very long. A few years after enacting it, Diocletian quietly revoked it. Some of his more moderate co-emperors, such as Constantius, apparently didn't even enforce the edict on their territories, seeing how impractical this whole thing was. Here's an adorable little bit of imperial propaganda from this time of the edict. On the reverse of this numus, we have a figure standing, holding a set of scales. This is moneta, the incarnation of coinage, the goddess of coins. On the legends, we can read the slogan, Sacra Moneta Augustorum, meaning the holy coinage brought by our emperors. Basically, an attempt of giving a sacred aspect to coinage, that the supposedly authoritarian measures of the emperor were actually an act of piety for the common good. It would have been more practical, frankly, if they just replaced these legends with the slogan, respect our maximum prices or else. But Diocletian wasn't one to simply let himself be defeated by the forces of the free market. Remember his empire-wide census? His main concern was still the maintenance of the army, the largest expenditure in the imperial budget by far. If the money was no good, well, he now knew where all of the empire's citizens lived, what they worked on, what they produced, and how much they had. If the army couldn't be paid in coins, he was going to pay them in kind, in actual goods. The logistics involved in maintaining the Roman army were very well calculated. The army knew how much each soldier, each cohort, each legion needed in clothes, food, raw materials, everything for them to be in fighting shape. They literally had centuries of records of military campaigns and how much they cost in resources. And the Roman economy of the time was, up to a certain extent, capable of supplying what the army needed. But Diocletian could not afford any disruptions in the fine-tuned logistic systems he had in place. So, in typical Diocletianic fashion, he decided to solidify the Roman economy, so no shortages would ever affect the army. And what do I mean by that? From that moment on, if you had a job, you couldn't change professions. Any guilds or professional associations, like a guild of blacksmiths, for example, was co-opted and simply became another arm of government, with fixed salaries and job positions, and your sons were forced to work on your profession after you died. If they wanted to work on something else, well, too bad. Diocletian couldn't afford a shortage of horseshoes to his cavalry units because the son of a blacksmith wanted to work as a jeweler instead. Basically, he saw every citizen as a cog in the complex machine that was his empire. Restrictions to the movement of people were also imposed. You couldn't relocate to another part of the empire without authorization. The Roman Empire wasn't this land of boundless opportunity in the previous centuries, but up until that time, there was a certain degree of social mobility for those who worked hard, had a bit of luck, and knew how to play to their natural advantages. Let's say you were the son of a farmer, by far the most common profession in the Roman world, despite the fame for Rome for being this highly urbanized empire. If you were a smart individual and knew how to trade, you could slowly and steadily accumulate wealth and improve your lot in life. If you were blessed with a strong body and a disciplined mind, you could try the military. And if you survived, you could rise through the ranks and see yourself retiring, if not in luxury, at least in a better position. In Diocletian's time, however, if you were the son of a farmer, you were destined to be a farmer, and you were not allowed to leave the province you were from. And if that looks an awful lot like the kind of life serfs lived during the medieval age, you would be right. Imperial legislation passed by later emperors officialized and reinforced this new serfdom system. And as Western Rome fell in the following centuries, being replaced by a series of new kingdoms, very little changed in the lives of most people. And I know many of you might be thinking up to this point that my opinion on Diocletian is that he is a mix between the reincarnation of the Antichrist and the God Emperor of hyperinflation, but his reign is truly a fascinating moment in Western history, full of nuance. Was he an autocrat? Yes, but he was an autocrat in a time of autocrats. Ask any Roman if they preferred Diocletian over the political instability of previous years, and you would hear a resounding yes from everyone. The survival of Rome for another 2 centuries was in good part thanks to him. The survival of the Eastern Empire for another 1,000 years after the fall of the West might not even have happened if it wasn't for his political reforms. He still is one of Rome's most important emperors, despite his transformation of the Roman state and his establishment of monetary inflation as an official state policy. I don't like him. I think he was a tyrant, but that's the beauty of history. It is nuanced. It needs to be looked at from multiple angles. Maybe out of all of the tyrants Rome could have had at that time, he was actually the best. However, we can't deny that his attempts to control the economy with an iron fist are a wonderful, well-studied example of how, when it comes to economics, you may be able to manipulate the markets. But if there's one thing you cannot do, is to avoid facing the consequences of trying to manipulate the markets. But hey, I'm not the one who's going to pass the final judgment on Diocletian. History will decide his fate. What about you? Do you think Diocletian was justified in his actions? I would love to know what you think in the comment section down below. I hope you learned something new today. Leave a like and consider subscribing if you did. Happy coin collecting, and I'll see you soon.